right before we jump into this video, if you want to get my free 11 Days to Better Photography mini video course, head on over to FroKnowsPhoto.com/11days to get started right now. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and welcome to another 3 shots or less where I go into different situations and scenarios to try to get the perfect exposure in 3 shots or less. So here we are at the Fro factory again, where the situation and scenario I'm trying to capture is I want to shoot this quarter and get as much of it in focus as possible while using a macro lens. So what are we using to shoot this time? We have the Canon EOS M5 mirrorless camera, as well as the 28mm super macro lens, but we have it set to macro, not super macro. Now keep in mind, if you have a DSLR that has live view, you can basically get the same effect that you're going to see me do right here in this situation and scenario. So when you're trying to get almost everything in focus when you're shooting macro, the height, the distance, and all of that plays a role in making sure you can do that. But this is just a test scenario, so I may not be able to get everything completely in focus. But where are we going to start? So what kind of settings are we going to start with? Well, I think the best thing to do for the first shot is to set the camera to auto and see what the camera thinks the proper exposure should be. So we are set to auto right now. I am focused right in the middle. I'm also set to 2-second timer. That's because I don't want to have any shake happen when I press the shutter and it shoots. So I have the timer set. So let's go ahead and take the first photo and boom, 2 seconds. And click, and let's take a look at that photo. The auto settings came up as 1/60th of a second at f4 at ISO 125. Now you can also see that the coin isn't really all in focus. Now most of you guys out there who aren't beginners will understand that's because we didn't shoot at a higher aperture. Something like f22 would give you more depth of field. So I'm going to go ahead and switch into manual, and I'm going to set this to f22 for the second photo, but leaving everything exactly where it was for the first shot. So I'm going to switch this to manual. I'm going to go ahead and change my aperture to, let's go to f22. And yes, being that I'm in live view, I can see that the photo has gone completely dark, but I'm going to take it anyway to show you what's going to happen. Yep. It's completely dark. Now, I know that you have live view on and you could sit here and you could dial all the settings in without even taking a single photo and get the exposure pretty right. But what I want you to do is think about what we just did. How can we build the exposure without using the live view? And it's not cheating to use the live view, but just imagine what's going to happen if you can build the exposure yourself. Then you're going to be a much better photographer, and then these tools that you can use are going to be much better in your hands. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm not going to rely on the camera. I'm going to write down the initial settings that I had because I want to figure out how we get the proper exposure for the third shot, being that we have 1 shot left, and I don't want to use the live view right now to give me that exposure. So we started at 1/60th of a second at f4, ISO 125. Our goal is to get to f22. Now let me show you how we got there just by using the f-stops. How many stops of light did we make this change with? So we go from f4 to 5.6 is 1 stop, to then f8, f11, f16, to f22. That's 1 stop, 2 stops, 3 stops, 4 stops. That's 5 stops of light that you can see right there to get to f22. The second picture we took was at 1/60th of a second at f22 at ISO 125. Now I know this is a little longer than some of the other 3 shots or less that we've done, but I think it's important that we draw this out, because if you can start to get to understand this in your mind, it's going to make shooting in manual much easier, even with your mirrorless cameras or DSLRs, no matter what you have. So we now need to get 5 stops of light to get the proper exposure. The reason I say that is because we know at f4 with the current 1/60th of a second and ISO 125 that the exposure was right. The camera told us that. When we went to f22, we were off by 5 stops. So if we can find 5 stops of light between the shutter speed and the ISO, we can then get the same exact exposure as we started with when the camera was in auto. So how are we going to find this? All right, let's go with the shutter speed. 1 stop of light less, because we want to let more light in, would be 1/30th of a second, because we halved it. To go half again for another stop is 1/15th of a second. Then to go down 1 more to get 3 stops of light here, we're going to go down to 1/8th of a second. Now I could continue going down in shutter speed, being that I'm on the tripod, but I want to show you that I'm going to use the shutter speed and the ISO in order to get the proper exposure. Now, if anybody's sitting out there saying, Jared, you always say don't change 2 things at one time when you're guessing the exposure. Well, that's absolutely correct when you're guessing the exposure. But we know we need to get 5 stops of light. So we're no longer guessing because we need to build the proper exposure right here with 1 more shot, and we know it's 5 stops. I just got 3 stops of light right here. That's 3 stops. Now I need 2 more stops of light to get to the same exposure. So we have 125 ISO. We double that to get 1 more stop of light. That's 250 ISO. And to get 1 more stop of light, we double that and we get to 500 ISO. And yes, again, I know I'm on a tripod. I could shoot this almost as slow as I want to, and it would still be stable, but this is all to show you how we built the exposure. All right, so now let's go dial in 1/8th of a second at f22 at ISO 500 and see how the results turn out. All right, let's dial this down to 1/8th of a second. Let me go over to ISO and put that to 500. Let's take the photo, focused in the same place. 2 seconds right there on the self timer. Boom. Look at the photo. And look at that exposure. We'll go back to the one that we took, that the camera took. And you can see right there, it's the same exposure, but now you have more depth of field. Almost everything is in focus. We built this. Now, if you're using the back of your screen, you could build it just the same way. Live view and an electronic viewfinder is amazing for learning if you understand what you're trying to do. But you saw how we did this. I knew this was going to be difficult to get right in 3 shots or less using the live view, because live view is pretty good. It shows you a very good representation of what the results are going to be. But I wanted to build out the exposure, and that's exactly what we did right here to get the proper exposure in 3 shots or less. We started in auto, we let the camera make its decisions, we went to f22, we knew we needed 5 stops. I showed you how to build those 5 stops yourself, and then we got the perfect exposure on the 3rd shot. So that is another 3 shots or less. If there's a different situation or scenario you'd like to see us shoot in, go ahead and leave a comment down below and we will try to do our best to do that. So I hope you enjoyed this. That's where I'm gonna leave it. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya. Have you ever wondered where you can get an I Shoot Raw t-shirt? Well, you can. Head on over to store.FroKnowsPhoto.com right now to check out this design as well as many other designs, and you can start wearing an I Shoot Raw shirt and getting people asking you questions like, what does that mean? It's a great conversation starter, so head on over to store.FroKnowsPhoto.com to check out all of the stuff in the merch store.